Okay, so this right here is the follow-up video that I was talking about when I told you I was going to do this video when it came to after the one about Leah Thomas. This is the one that I'm talking about. And it's from this website called 4w.pub. And it was written or published on January 3rd, 2022. And it says, guide encourages activists to quote unquote force team trans identified males with racial minorities. Like I said, we over here have been talking about for so long how a lot of people in the academy, especially those who identify as the T, have been trying to shoehorn themselves into the plight of what we're going through, when there definitely is no comparison. After all, you just had Leah Thomas compare themselves a whole let me keep in perspective that this is a person, while they might identify as trans, is still in society a PC individual, so they still have a very high level of privilege. But they had the nerve to actually compare themselves to that of Jackie Robinson. Are you kidding me? Even the teammate that put them on blast said, huh? What are you talking about? First off, to even compare yourself to Jackie Robinson is absurd. Jackie Robinson didn't even swim. And they said of trans sports. That's what also got me. This person, like, you know what? I'm going to leave that one over there and just focus on this. So I'm going to go ahead and read this article. It says a controversial guide for trans activists advises them to force team the demands of trans identified males with the historical struggles of racial minorities. I had to just give a pause right there after reading that sentence, because there is no way that can ever happen. It's no way at all. See, this is the way that PC tries to keep themselves engaged into keep themselves shoehorned into the conversation. Because remember, some of them say that, and this is something else me and Afro Lee were talking about in the live stream, a lot of them feel like they are being oppressed and they're not being seen. So in order to be seen, they have to shoehorn their way into a struggle that they've created, might I add. Or it doesn't involve them, but that doesn't stop them, no. The guide, written by the Transgender Law Center and Lake Research Partners, a political strategy and public relations firm, is called Transgender Youth and the Freedom to Be Ourselves, Building Our Choir with a Race Class Narrative. Lake Research Partners is a Democratic Party operative that lists itself as a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient from the American Association of Political Consultants. Acting as a manual for activists, the document encourages trans issues such as eliminating single-sex spaces, allowing biological males to participate on women's sports teams, and granting minors access to trans medicalization to always be associated with other groups' struggles, specifically those of racial minorities. According to the guide, this is due to their focus groups having associated transgenderism primarily with white people. Like, they said a whole bunch in just that short paragraph. Again, listen to what they're saying. Eliminating single-sex spaces, which means no more gendered bathrooms or anything that's meant for women and men to do their own thing amongst themselves. Everything's got to see. This is the thing. They're doing everything to try to benefit themselves. This is the definition of not only insanity, but the epitome of being selfish and only looking out for you, but at the expense of making everyone else uncomfortable. Then they said, allowing biological males to participate on women's team sports, which that Leah Thomas is doing right now, and so many other people who identify as trans. This is what they're advocating for. Then they said, granting minors access to trans medicalization. Basically, they're going to allow minor children to go and get themselves cut up on a table as a child. I'm still trying to figure out how the World Health Organization took this out and replaced it with gaming. To this day, I'm still trying to figure this out. It's like ever since they took that out, they have literally gone overboard. Then it says, and to always be associated with other groups' struggles, specifically those of racial minorities. And they like to say that there's no agenda. Okay. Comments indicating many participants largely associated being transgender with being white or associate acceptance of transgender people with whiteness. The document notes going on to state that we found several effective paths towards interrupting this othering framework and increasing empathy and a sense of shared fate and community with transgender people, especially among Black, Latinx, AAPI, and indigenous audiences. So pay attention to what they're doing. They're saying that they don't want transgenderism to be associated with exclusively white exclusivity. They don't want it to be associated directly with whiteness anymore. So in order to separate themselves, they're going to do a whole bunch of other stuff and also shoehorn themselves into our issues and say that our issues are their issues, or that their issues are our issues. And we know that is definitely not the case. And people keep saying that there's no agenda. Get out of my face with that crap. The guy goes on to encourage trans activists to evoke race while discussing trans-related issues. So that means every time a trans-related issue comes up, they're going to try to make it sure that race always is brought up as a talking point to aid into whatever it is that they want, even if it's not needed. And I'm going to read this thing that says architecture of a race, class, gender narrative. It's also something that's posted in here. I'm going to read that because it could be important to this article. It says open with a shared value explicitly naming or evoking race, gender, and class. Effective opening values include the following: freedom to be ourselves, treating each other with dignity and respect, and the golden rule, treating others as we'd want to be treated. Whether we are black, white, or brown, native or newcomer, transgender or not, we want the freedom to be ourselves. 2 says name the villains who violate our values, expose their motivation of getting back into or holding on to power, and position them as a barrier to what our families need. And this is, but some people try to get and hold on to power by putting us in boxes based on what we look like, what we're from, and our genders. They stoke fear, so we turn against some group instead of demanding what our families need. Moving on. One of the strategic points goes further on the plan to crush opposition to the demands of trans-identified males, advising trans activists. See, this is a call to trans activists, not necessarily the trans community, but they're activists. That's why I keep telling black women, y'all need to get away from this, because if you're a black woman and you're for this, I don't know what to tell you. You're lost. You are lost in the sauce. They said advising trans activists to call out the villains by exploiting divisions across race. It then provides an example of associating trans youth with black students who are academically penalized for their hair, or female students who are told their clothes don't meet dress codes. Are y'all hearing that? What? Black people hair and what they say about women in their clothes and the dress code are not the same as what people go through in the academy with Hall T. They're not the same. They are worlds apart. But see what they're doing? They're trying to shoehorn that in there. And they're using their activists to do it. And a lot of their activists are mainly white. Quiet as it's kept. In a recent article for 4W, Black Marxist feminist writer Jennifer Seelin has decried the constant references to racial minorities by trans activists in an attempt to bolster their arguments, noting the tactic is a brilliant one after all. If one succeeds in obfuscating the meaning of woman, then on what basis can any woman, even those who aren't but self-identify as such, be excluded? On the hotly contested issues of males competing in women's sports team, the narrative guide encourages activists to connect the attacks on trans women athletes to the long legacy of discrimination against all women athletes. Are y'all hearing this? And like I said, keep in mind, this article was written on January the 3rd. This guide, I don't know if it actually does exist or if this is what they're trying to get to be made. January 3rd. I'm recording this January 15th. This was what, 2 weeks ago? A week ago? I don't know. Like 2 weeks ago, I'm guessing. Yeah. I think about a week ago, so ago. I hope y'all are really paying attention. The guide states that amongst its focus group, this message both shifted our audience from an individual to a collective mindset and disrupted transphobic conceptions of transgender girls and women as actually male. It goes on to give an example of, quote, a framing. Women's sports have never existed on an equal playing field. For too long, we have devalued women's sports, and we see this in a way that professional women athletes are underpaid compared to men, and how transgender women athletes are targeted, attacked, and forced out of their sport. Well, Leah Thomas compared themselves to that of Jackie Robinson. What you got to say about that? If anything, a lot of them forcing themselves out. But you know what they're doing? They're basically not only shoehorning their way into our issues, but they're trying to shoehorn themselves into every facet where they're not needed. This is how you spread an agenda. It's almost like a virus. It's like a cancer. Once the cancer gets in, what happens? It attacks one thing, then another thing, then another thing, because the cancer has to live, it has to thrive, it has to move, it has to survive. So it has to spread and feed on every molecule that it can in order to live. That's what I can compare this to. This guide is a cancer. You know what? I might actually title this video that. This guide is a cancer. And instead of striving for equality in sports, certain politicians are distracting us from the real issue by blaming transgender women instead of helping make sports a better place for all women. And see, when they shoehorn themselves into women's stuff, then that's when they say, now we're all women. See, this is Pandora's box. This is Pandora's box opening. It's open. It is wide open now. No longer is it opening. It's open. A recent poll has shown that 1 in 3 Americans strongly oppose biological males being allowed to play on women's collegiate sports, with 56% of U.S. adults expressing a belief that trans-identified males have an inherent comparative advantage. They do! To think otherwise is crazy. To think otherwise, it's crazy. And this 4W site, I think, is a feminist type of website based on their writers are all women and they all have feminist talking points. So like I said, whoever wrote this Andrea Nobre or Noob, whatever her name is, she's obviously for this. And based on the writers that I have seen, at least the authors that I'm scrolling down and looking at their pictures, I'm seeing white. It looks like a Hispanic woman and a few white women, and that's about it. At least the ones who write for this site. Like, if you look at the tags at the top, it says latest news, opinion, gender identity, transgender, male violence, feminism, and crime. They said they got male violence up there. They got a whole sector of just male violence. Feminism, trans. And like, I'm glad I came across this, because this doesn't sound like, this is not like a big publication to me. This doesn't sound like this is a big publication. It's a feminist rag. It's a white feminist rag. That's what it is. But look at who wrote it. A white feminist wrote this. They want to have trans activists force team, as they call it, with trans identified males with racial minorities. Trans identified males, I'm guessing that's someone who was born a female that now identifies as a man, or is that a person who was born a man now that identifies as a female, or they're talking about both? At this point, I don't know. It's just a big ball of confusion. But all I know is this: our issues and our struggles are not the same as theirs. You are not going to come over and think that they are the same, because they are not. I don't give a damn how many activists you activate. It's not happening. We are not the same. We will never be the same. So cut the shit out. In the words of the Crimson Cure, knock it off.